Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise to speak on the Forensic Science Queensland Bill 2023, and the bill has been introduced in response to the final report by Walter Sofronoff in the first commission of the inquiry, COI, into the systems and processes of Queensland Government's run forensic laboratory. COI was formed in response to the revelation on the lab's serious shortcomings exposed by the journalist Hedley Thomas and forensic scientist Dr. Kirsty Wright. Both are to be commended for the vital work they did in bringing this critical information to public notice. Through their diligent investigation and the courage and commitment of Vicky Blackburn, it was eventually brought to light that Queensland Government's forensic lab had been making significant errors over a long period of time in the analysis of DNA samples. The concern and the loss of confidence this has caused the public will be considerable, and the effects of this will be far-reaching. The inquiry, headed by Walter Sofronoff KC, revealed lab managers were focused on speed and efficiency gains rather than accuracy. It took the tragic case of Shandy Blackburn and the ongoing advocacy of her mother Vicky for this disgraceful breakdowns within the Queensland Forensic Science Laboratory to be uncovered. And during the bill's inquiry, the committee heard how deficiencies in the state's current forensic system may have resulted in perpetrators of violent crimes escaping justice. This has severely damaged public confidence in forensic DNA testing here in Queensland and in our criminal justice system as a whole. And if Queenslanders don't feel confident that the forensic evidence is being processed in a professional and effective manner, they will be less inclined to report their assault to authorities and less inclined to subject themselves to intrusive evidence collection procedures. The government must proactively ensure that these systemic failures never occur again. Victim survivors should not be confronted with the trauma of seeing their rapist or attacker walk free due to bureaucratic, political and technical mismanagement. Madam Deputy Speaker, faulty science has been one of the leading causes of miscarriages of justice in Queensland and throughout Australia for decades, with the most prominent example being the spectacular failure of forensic science in the Lindy Chamberlain case. The bill establishes the Director of Forensic Science Queensland and a new government office referred to as Forensic Science Queensland to support the Director. Clause 26 of the bill establishes the Forensic Science Queensland Advisory Council. The Council's functions are to monitor and review the policies and procedures of Forensic Science Queensland, particularly in relation to the administration of criminal justice. The Council's functions are broad and it will allow them to consider the written and unwritten policies, procedures and processes. As pointed out in the Gold Coast Hospital submission, missing from the Advisory Council member list are the clinical forensic medical examiners. This is a critical omission if the aim of Forensic Science Queensland is to give advice or make recommendations about policies and procedures relating to the administration of criminal justice. It would be hard to envisage this working effectively without these key stakeholders represented on the board. Madam Deputy Speaker, DNA testing and analysis is a fundamental part of our criminal justice system. It is to be hoped that the mission of the new bill's new advisory council will be to identify and eliminate causes of error in the criminal justice system. And you can't do that without looking at forensic practices. Forensic practices, as everyone knows, have been abundant sources of error in this field. We've seen questionable forensic practices around bite mark analysis, hair sample analysis, blood spatter analysis and drug field test kits. DNA analysis has been one of the most reliable forensic practices in the criminal justice system and one of its most valuable tools. And it can be conclusively identify an offender and it can conclusively exonerate those who have been wrongly accused or convicted. However, even though it's often viewed as the gold standard, it continues to raise concerns, especially in the situation where a mixture is present. So the newest entry in the field of DNA is automated DNA machines, and this is where the analysis are performed by robotic technology. For police and prosecutors, this technology holds a promise of nearly immediate results, allowing quick arrests of identified perpetrators. As a technology, it has the potential to radically change the way DNA analysis is used, and this means that safeguards and oversights are urgently needed, and we must ensure that problems we've seen with the introduction of this new technology in the field of criminal justice never happens again. We need to also think about this issue in terms of the proliferation of new, cheap and accessible technology that is just being fast-tracked into use by the government entities. Some sort of review needs to be conducted, looking at how that impacts the way it's being used and what oversight mechanisms have been put in place. If this technology becomes more and more available and you start having police its machines could become the baseline for DNA testing in terms of frontline investigations and shut out the traditional forensic labs. If that's possible, how can we go about preparing necessary guardrails and protections to safeguard that, and to do in such a way that it's done that's consistent with scientific integrity across forensics? We need the government to put transparent rules and regulations in place. Right now, there aren't any. There are no rules or regulations on what we're doing. I think this is a disgrace, and given that we're nearly 2 decades of having more and more people exposed to this technology in Queensland, strict rules need to come out of this, and the field of forensics in Queensland is going to have to change its ways. The government, too, is going to have to pick up their game, making sure our labs are given the staffing, the resources and the funding that they need. The other problem with this technology is that the danger of it being used as a shortcut to answer and closing a case, which is why I think it's critical that more resources are put into traditional investigative techniques. The human aspect is still the most important because, let's face it, DNA is the easiest thing in the world to plant and to contaminate, and at some point that becomes a real issue. It used to be the prosecutors would not take a case where there was just DNA. You had to have more than that. Now, however, there are a lot of cases where it's just based on DNA. And particularly with these old cold cases we keep hearing about, it's all DNA with those cases because no one remembers the details or has kept receipts to establish that defence. It's impossible to fight it. So I would just like to see much more funding and resources given to traditional investigations and manual testing. Another point I'd like to make is that we still have huge challenge when it comes to getting police, lawyers and the general public to understand what these DNA kits and investigative DNA reports that laboratories issue actually mean. And that's an education issue and a training issue. We need to understand how this information is being used because, from my own reading on the subject, a lot of this stuff is just being taken on trust by professionals, juries and the public. What do we know about these machines and whether they are functioning properly? How do we validate the standards for calibration and all the stuff that surrounds it? These are people's lives we're talking about, their futures, their standing in society, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you.